You're a beginner CAD user and you're wondering which software you should use. Solidworks, Fusion, Onshape, what are the differences? And does it really matter which one I choose? What I can tell you right off the bat is that Solidworks is the best software out of these three. Now, these other packages, Fusion 360 and Onshape, they're sort of similar to each other in many ways, but there are big drawbacks, I think, in Fusion 360. Fusion 360, the way that it organizes features and components and insertions of components and the mating of those components is terrible. The reason it's called Fusion, I think, is because it just fuses all of that together and it puts everything in the same timeline. You end up with this timeline of all these modifications to the parts themselves, with mates between those parts, with insertions of parts, and every single insertion, it has it as part of the history. And the part that I think is kind of insulting almost is that you don't have to use the timeline. Like, you can just turn it off and not even use it. But why would you want to teach people to model in that way? That there's no timeline, that they're just going to model in the moment. They're going to create a bunch of features and they don't have any way to modify those features. I don't think that's a good way to teach people. I'm not saying that they're forcing people to do that. It's an option in the software. But still, it's just not good practice. Onshape, on the other hand, it doesn't have that problem. The way things are organized makes sense, I think. I really like the way that they've nested features together. I'll just show you a simple example. I'm going to look at one of these planes and I'm going to come over here, throw a sketch on the plane, and we're going to finish a sketch. I'm going to come to extrude, and you're going to see that in the extrude dialog box, we have all these options all in the same place. I can make a new solid, I can add to an existing solid, I can remove, use this as a cut extrude, I can do an intersect. Like, that's smarter than even Solidworks, at least in the organization method, because everything is in one wizard. I have to give them credit for that. And the online nature of it, I haven't really had any problems with it. There are times where it just freezes, it kind of crashes. I believe that they say that the software doesn't crash, but that's not true. The big downside, and I'm going to bring this back to Fusion 360, is that in Onshape, there really aren't any options for buying it without spending a ton of money. I mean, this software is like $1,500, I think, starting. Obviously, there's a free version and you can use that, but it's a big first step to take if you're going to use this. Unless you're making good money from it, then it's worth it. But Fusion 360, on the other hand, the pricing seems to be between $300 and $500, at least right now, as I could say, January 2025. They're making so many different changes to the software all the time. That's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing, because when they start making changes to some of these main categories of stuff that's going on, like if I show you kind of in the surface here, a lot of this is kind of the same. Sometimes things do shift around a little bit, and that can be kind of disconcerting. So we have here some options that we just can't access anymore. And this is a great example. We used to have simulation. We used to have generative design included, at least as a pilot, and that seems to have disappeared. So there's a little bit of uncertainty, I think, in the world of Fusion 360. Now, again, if you're doing something simple, if you want to create a part with no timeline, for instance, if you want to just start modeling, then yeah, you should use Fusion 360. But if you want an engineering grade software, and I'm not saying Fusion 360 is not engineering grade, but I just think that when you start getting into assemblies that have a lot of parts, and you start getting into assemblies where you're doing features in the assembly, not even in the part, now you're running into all these different complications, and you're running into adaptivity between sketches, between parts. And the way that Fusion 360 works with those is a little bit convoluted. I'm going to open up this tank body that I worked on, kind of like an RC tank project. And you're going to notice that when I show you all the sketches all at once, it's so hard to see anything. You can kind of see if I zoom in here, all our objects are visible now. So if I rotate this around, you can see the way that they display the sketches just not concise. It's like The lines are very like obvious and thick. It's software made for beginners. You can see it. You can see that it's made for beginners because a beginner software is going to have all that stuff on. It's going to have all the sketches on all the time, kind of by default. It's going to be a little bit harder to set them to not show. And it's also showing me these little flags for the mates. I mean, why would I need to really see that? Again, if you're a beginner, you might want to see that there's a mate in one spot or another, but I just think it's distracting. And also, I mean, why are all these planes showing and these XYZ triads? It's just, it makes it confusing. So I know I talk a lot about this. I seem like I have a problem with Fusion 360. It's because I just think that there are better packages out there, and Onshape is certainly better. Solidworks is even better than that. I really think Solidworks is the king, and it still is. But these other software packages, we'll get into kind of a little bit of a different topic here. Something like simulation, when you look at what Fusion 360 has and what Onshape has, it kind of does beat Solidworks. Fusion 360 is updating their simulation stuff way more. Solidworks, I think, was catching up to that. So now they're working on greater and greater things for Solidworks, but Fusion 360, they've been there for a while. They've had some great packages for simulation, including airflow and generative design tools. So I have to give them credit for that. And if you look at the pricing, it's really not that expensive for what you're getting with simulation. But it's funny to me that an entry-level software for beginners, they would have simulation. I mean, obviously people are going to use it. People in schools are going to use it, which I think is where Fusion 360 shines. I think it shines mostly in education and in the maker community. I think those people are maybe going to use it, but like it also doesn't really seem like the right target audience. I mean, a software like SolidWorks benefits greatly from having simulation because it's all professionals using it. So of course they want to have those tools right there. But with something like Fusion 360, if it's being used by schools and it's being used by makers, we don't really do simulations all the time. Not if we're makers that mostly do 3D printing or have a little shop at home or something like that. So it's interesting. When it comes to what Onshape offers for simulation, it's worlds away from Fusion 360. I'm actually going to show you that because I happen to have the full version, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see a list with players this big running on SolidWorks. And, you know, it's not just simulation. They have all kinds of stuff here. CAM and, you know, project management and all these tools.